And today's topic is, yes, the 5 mistakes you're making on your tech resume. And as she mentioned, my name is Bernadette Joy. And if you can go to the next slide. Just to give you a little bit more background on me, so I actually spent 10 years in HR across multiple industries, including tech. I was also in financial services in 2008 in New York City, so that was a whole exciting time, and I can tell you all about that. But I also, most recently, was a head of HR at a tech company here in Charlotte. And so what that means for you is that I have literally read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of resumes from software developers to IT support specialists, and I've kind of seen it all. So this is all from direct experience. This is not theory. And a little bit more backstory on me. I actually, in that tech company, was working really closely with the CEO and the COO and got involved in a lot of other things not HR related, and made me realize I probably wanted to go and do something different. So I went back to school to get my MBA, thinking that would help me figure it out. But I left the MBA program, still not sure what I wanted to do, but $70,000 of student loan debt. And the reason that's all fascinating is because during that program, I actually had an idea to start up what is now called Dressed. Has anyone heard of Dressed at all? Oh, yay. So Dressed is basically like a local Rent the Runway, except we're in person. You can actually try stuff on in our studio, and everything is a lot more affordable, and I implement a lot of tech stuff into my business, so it's more than a traditional boutique. And because I wanted to start this business, I also at the time had taken a job at another tech company. So I was going to school, taking this business off the ground, and working a day job, and I realized this is totally not sustainable. I'm gonna lose my mind. So my husband and I got really serious and paid off that $70,000 in less than a year. And I got a lot of people reaching out to me, basically asking me for cups of coffee to pick my brain and ask how I did that. And I just got really hyped up on coffee. Like you can tell, I didn't drink any coffee today, and this is already how I am, so I didn't need to do that anymore. And that's when I launched my second business, which is BernadetteJoy.com, where I help people save money, make money, and figure out ways to either reduce their expenses or increase their income. And guess what? One of the best ways that you can increase your income is get a better job, right? And so when I would have these conversations with people on how to get that better job, and sometimes it was someone who was like, I'm a software developer and I want to be a senior software developer, or I had someone who was an accountant and I want to do UX now, and I was like, what? Okay, we can figure that out. All it came down to was how are they telling that story in their resume, and when I looked at their resumes, and thanks to my 10 years in HR, I was like, oh, this is not going to work, and here's the reasons why it's not working, and let's figure that out. So that's what this talk is about. So some disclaimers here. Resumes are indeed quite subjective. You'll probably get so many opinions as to what a resume should or should not look like. And when it comes down to it, it really depends on what your story is and how that applies to you. So take what you see today and figure out what applies to you. None of this is rocket science. I just heard some other talks about a whole bunch of other stuff that I don't understand. But this stuff is not rocket science, but yet I see a lot of people making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And interestingly, still people come and reach out to me and ask for help on these things, because even though it sounds simple, when you're trying to apply it to your own experience, it's hard to be objective about that. This is my favorite part. I have no affiliations other than to myself. And the reason I say that is because when I used to be part of HR or representing an employer, there were so many things I could not tell candidates, right? There were so many people that I would meet, even at conferences like this. I used to go and do recruiting at tables just like that. And I would get someone's resume, and I was like, oh, if they would just tweak this a little bit, then I could submit this into the hiring manager. But I wasn't allowed to do that because I was the recruiter. I was not the person who's representing the candidate, right? So now that I'm not representing anyone other than my own company, I can tell you what really is going on, be really transparent about that process. And there is, of course, no one-size-fits-all situation. We'll talk through some of that. And again, if you have questions afterwards, I'm happy to talk through your stuff. Next slide. Oh, perfect, you're already there. So, really easy. I came up with this past year because I like acronyms and it makes it easy for me to remember. And we're gonna talk through what ACE means and how that relates to your interview. So if you get nothing else out of this, ACE is your key to a good resume. So the first letter, A, stands for appearance. And the number one mistake that I talk about, which is the easiest, But also sometimes the hardest, especially in tech, is these are actually the thoughts that I had in my head when I was a recruiter, and I looked at a resume, and I was like, you don't know how to kiss on a resume, and that makes no sense to most people right now, right? But if you go to the next slide, here is what it felt like when I was a recruiter. And let me give you this context, and this is really important for you to know as a candidate. So when I was head of HR for this tech company, I had probably about 10 jobs open at any given time. And that doesn't seem like a lot, right? But it was 10 types of jobs, right? So we might have a software developer job open, but we were hiring for 8 software developers, right? Or we had an IT project manager role open and we needed 2 of those, right? So even though I had 10 jobs open, I was probably looking for like 30 people at a time, right? I was the only person at the time that I started there, because when I went there, they had no HR, which we can talk about that another time too. But that's what it felt like and we were a small company, so we weren't Google, we weren't Facebook, we weren't, some of these places are probably getting hundreds of thousands of resumes at a time. We were a smaller shop, about 100 employees, but at any given moment, I had 10 requisitions open, and I had anywhere between 10 and 50, maybe 100 candidates for a given role. So you can imagine my day, which also did not just constitute recruiting, right? I had to do benefits, I had to do payroll, I had to do all this other stuff, right? Guess what? As much as I'd love to read your entire resume, I ain't got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that, right? And that's the reality of it. And if you look at some of these other companies, again, like Google, I have friends who work at Google and Facebook, right? They have even less time than I have, right? Because they've got thousands of resumes to look at. So if you go to the next slide, the first tip, what KISS stands for, is keep it simple, stupid, okay? Meaning, a couple of things. The first thing is that your resume should be able to be read in 10 seconds or less. And you think I'm exaggerating, but actually it's probably more like 8 seconds, because, and I learned this when I was in staffing as well. I remember the first time I was in a recruiting job, and I saw this great resume that I had, and I actually was the, dewy-eyed person that was like, oh, let me read this whole resume, like get their whole life story, and gave it to my manager, said like, I think this person would be a great candidate. Literally looked at it and like flipped it away. I was like, not a fit. And I was like, you didn't even look at it. He's like, I just know from taking a glance at it that it's not a fit. And unfortunately, that's the reality. So you want to make sure that your resume is super easy to read in less 10 seconds. So what does that mean? The obvious stuff, right? Nice font, not a ton of like clutter, making sure all of your information is easy to read at the top. I'm surprised at how many times I still see a resume without a LinkedIn profile link on it, because I will look you up and see what you look like. And also that it should be no more than 1 page. And this is a pushback that I get a lot of times. And I've had clients who are anywhere from just out of school to one of my most recent clients was a CMO at a company. And 20 years of experience, still 1 page. So if you're out of school or less than 5 years of experience, there is no reason that your resume should be more than a page, because realistically, no one's going to get to the second page. And likely, I'm going to be running off to my meeting to come meet you, and I probably left that second page on the printer because I didn't think that there was going to be a second page. So if nothing else, if you have a 2-page resume or more today, cut it down to a page and you're already like 80% of the way there. Does that make sense? Helpful? Okay, great. Mistake number 2. This is something that I tell a lot of people who are kind of later on in their careers, which is you wrote your resume for the jobs that you had, not the jobs that you want. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So what does that mean? I like to assume, I think this is a fair assumption, that if you are applying for a job, you probably want a job that's better than the one that you have right now, right? Whether it's better pay, better hours, better flexibility, ping pong, whatever you want, or better responsibilities, or a step up, right? And yet, I see so many resumes that are spending way too much time on stuff that you did earlier in your career that does not matter or does not apply to that job. Likewise, so in the case of if you're applying for a job that's a step up, then you need to show the responsibilities that you've had that is already at the step up that you want to be at, not the stuff that you're necessarily just doing right now that is a level below what you're looking for. And I get that, I see that all the time. I see people saying, I don't understand why I'm not getting promoted. I'm ready to do that next thing. But reality is that when you're looking for a job, they're already looking for someone who has the skill sets that they need now. And likely you probably already have those skill sets and you already have those responsibilities, but you didn't write it down. The next slide is thinking about what do you want that next job to be. So I'm using myself as an example here. I mentioned to you I was in HR for 10 years. I ain't going back to HR anytime soon. But what I want to do in the future is do more things like speaking engagements, run my shop, maybe help run a bigger brand someday, right? So am I going to put all the things that I did about employer relations and recruiting and like doing payroll on my resume? No, I'm going to talk about, I'm probably going to add this to my resume today. I spoke at the Flirks conference, That is something that's more relevant to the next job. Another example, like I said, I had a client who was an accountant who wanted to go into UX, and I was like, all right, well, let's talk about that. What I didn't realize is that they worked for a really small company, and that person actually did work really closely with marketing and with branding and with helping build out the interface of their internal system, not an external client-facing system, but he didn't even realize, and I think the talked about it before, he didn't realize he was doing UX stuff until we actually talked about it. But when we looked at his resume, he was like, I do debits and credits, and I run a finance team, and like nobody cares about that if you're doing UX, right? So think about the things that you're doing, even if it's extracurricular, even if it's a small portion of your job, even if it's because you're on an affinity group, or maybe you're in a culture group or something like that, that could apply to your job, and put that into your resume because it's relevant for that next thing. So the easiest thing I can tell you, tip number 2, is line up your resume to the job description. This is really, again, not rocket science. This is what I tell my clients to do. Take your resume, one hand, take your job description that you're applying for in the other hand, highlight all of the things in that job description that you have experience in. If you see that there's not a lot of highlighting going on, that's a problem. If you see there is a lot of highlighting on, then go back in that resume and highlight where that matches to the job description. Very simple. And that's honestly what most recruiters are doing too, because guess what? I was never a UX designer. I was never a software developer, but yet here I am, deciding if you're going to be a fit for the company. So I'm looking at that job description, looking at that resume, and trying to see if it's a match. And again, that goes back to why it's so important to make sure you're keeping it simple. Now, mistake number 3. Now, I have really good clients who are super excited to get to it, do their homework, and then they send me their resume, and it's literally a copy-paste of the job description. I'm like, okay, took it a little bit too far there. So the next thing is you wrote the same stuff as everybody else. Go to the next slide. So this is my worst nightmare, both as like a female, as a owner of a dress company, all of that, right? I have so many people coming into my shop because they say, I don't want to go to this gala and have the same thing that someone else is wearing, right? Like, how many women are scared of that when they go to an event, right? Well, and also that outfit's hideous, so we don't want that anyway, right? But that is what it feels like to me sometimes when I'm reading resume after resume after resume, right? For example, I had to hire 15 new customer service reps who are all doing IT support. And the same thing kept coming up on the resumes. I know how to answer phones. I answer customer inquiries in a timely manner. I log all of our cases into our blah, blah, blah system. And again, think about who's reading it. If I've read 15 of the same thing over and over again, how am I going to know to pick your resume versus everybody else's? And you're also going to have to remember, even as qualified as you are for this job, right, there's probably many other people who are qualified as well and who are coming from the same background. So what can you do and put on your resume that is going to look and feel different? If you go to the next slide. And I get this question a lot where people are like, but Bernadette, like literally that's what I did. I had someone who was an executive assistant and she said, Bernadette, that is my job. I answer phones, I answer the fax, I greet people at the door. Like, I don't know how else to make that pop, right? And I asked her, well, how many phone calls do you get a day? How many executives do you actually support? How many trips, if you're putting on your resume that you are booking travel, how many trips are we talking about? We're talking about one a year? Are we talking about every week that your executive is going to go travel? So tell me how much you did something, how often you did something, or how fast you did it, right? So it's not enough as a project manager to say, and I'm like quoting actual bullets, right? I am able to deliver key deliverables to stakeholders in a timely manner. Like, what does a timely manner mean? Like, was that project a $8 million project that you delivered in 6 weeks? I don't know if that's good or bad, but it sounds pretty good to me. That's better than just saying, I delivered it in a timely manner, right? So think about, even the little things, if you can say, I answer 50 phone calls a day. I answer 100 customer emails a day. I was able to complete this project 2 days faster than the person next to me. That little difference goes a long, long way in differentiating you from the other people. Make sense? Great. All right. Oh, so I forgot about ACE. So A was appearance. C, those next two were content. So we're talking about what are you actually writing on your resume. So appearance, content, and the last part of ACE, E, is evaluation. And what do I mean by evaluation? Quite simply, it's the interview. And these are the pieces that I see a lot of other resume writers kind of forget about. And specifically, what I've noticed, because I just came out of grad school as well, the career centers seem to miss this as well when helping people with their resumes, which is how is this resume going to set you up for all of your future interviews and conversations? So, mistake number 4, you left yourself open to having a bad interview. And how does this relate? Can you go to the next slide? I don't know if y'all can see it. I really like memes and stuff, so, you know. Why did you leave your last job, says the hiring manager. He said, the company relocated and didn't tell me where, right? So, not uncommon, but you want to be able to highlight the best parts of your career. And also, especially if you're going to be later on in your career, there might be some jobs or stints that wasn't so great. And even if nothing bad happened, like you got fired or like you left on bad terms or anything, like sometimes I have people who just straight up didn't like that job, right? Or straight up don't like your current job. So if that's the case, then what you want to do is focus your resume on the pieces that you really like, that you really are excited about. And what I usually do is I'll sit down with someone and actually have a mock phone screen, and we'll walk through their whole resume. And I'll notice sometimes I'm like, you talked about this particular job for a good 15 of the 30 minutes, and yet it's 2 lines on your resume. And then this other job that you told me you hated your boss and like you couldn't wait to get out of there, like you spent 4 lines of just like the first part of that job, and it's half of your resume. Now, does that make sense in an interview, right? And usually what happens when you go into an interview is, let me ask a question. How long, last interview you've been to, how long was that interview? 30 minutes, max, right? 30 minutes, not a lot of time, right, to tell someone everything that you've done. So you want to use that resume as a script to make sure that you have consistent conversations every time so that you're not getting stuck, and that you are highlighting the parts that you are most excited about, because it will show when you actually interview. The other piece I get is people sometimes like either overinflating or trying to make things like more fancy than they really are. I'll read this for the people in the back. Says, tell us about your qualifications. He says, I'm a PhD. Says, okay, well, what do you exactly mean by PhD? He said, I passed high school with difficulty. And I see that really often, especially actually in the software developer space, where I see a lot of people who didn't graduate with a degree, and it's totally cool. Like, you didn't necessarily need to. You went to a great coding, institution or something else, but they still feel the need to put that they went to school somewhere. And I'll, as a former recruiter, I'll be like, you put education, you went to the school, but you didn't put a degree. I said, well, I didn't finish. Well, why are we even talking about this then? Why is this on your resume? Well, everyone else has a university on their degree. I'm like, on their resume. Well, if you didn't finish, then we're going to have a whole conversation as to why you didn't finish, and now we just wasted 5 of the 30 minutes of your interview talking about something that really doesn't bode well for you, and also takes away time from things that you were really good at. So, tip number 4 is to use your resume as a script to highlight the best parts and look at it from a proportion standpoint. If your favorite job, the one that you love talking about, is a small portion of your resume, and the job that you don't like is a big portion of your resume, you've got some work to do. And the last one, so we're almost at lunch, I promise. So, last one in evaluation, mistake number 5 is, honestly, I just forgot who you were. Like, as a recruiter, I had 10 interviews back to back, and I had interviews for 3 days in a row, and I talked to, that makes 30 software developers or 30 IT project managers, and honestly, like, all the conversations just started blending into my head. So I like to use this example because, tech or not, I think everyone can understand this, is if you were a chef, right, and I was a restaurant owner, let's say Yafo, because I love Yafo. Well, I don't really use chefs. Whatever. Yafo, right? And I'm saying, let's pretend that Yafo is like super high end. I am hiring my next head chef, and you come into our interview and we look at your resume, and I'm like, okay, so on your resume it says you know how to cut vegetables, you know how to plate a dessert, you know how to turn in an oven. Okay, well, I don't really know what to ask you about that because I already assumed you knew how to do that because you're a chef. But also, you know, there's nothing interesting for me to ask in terms of questions. And that's not dissimilar from what I've seen from people in the tech space, right? I see a lot of developers who talk about all of the technical stuff that they did, but they don't tell me what that meant for the company or how much more money that brought in or when that product got launched. I see a lot of project managers who put things like, you know, I know how to manage key stakeholders, but I don't know who those key stakeholders are, and I don't know, you know, in what time frame, and I don't know if that $8 million project is in the context of, you know, $10 million or it's in the context of $100 million, right? So instead, if I were to take the same example and I said, oh, okay, great, you're a chef. So in the last 2 years, you opened up 3 restaurants, you rearranged your spring menu, and now the restaurant is 100% more profitable. Oh, and you hired 2 sous chefs, and they're both chefs at the other locations. That's pretty cool. Well, guess what? Already the conversation is that much more interesting. And afterwards, let me ask, how many people interviewed and got a job offer the same day? Ah, that's pretty good. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 more than I usually get, right? Actually, I got that one time too. And I was shocked, right? Because that usually does not happen. So what usually happens, right, is you go for an interview, they tell you, great, we're going to see you in a couple of weeks, we'll let you know. Sometimes you don't hear for months at a time. But the hiring decision takes a long time. There's a lot of people involved, and you have to rely on that person who talked to you to remember who you were. So you want to make sure that person 3 weeks from now, a month from now, my husband got a job offer for an IT project manager 4 months later, and how they remembered him, not sure. I'm going to guess that he followed the ACE stuff, actually. And so you want people to remember you. So making sure that your resume matches what you say in the discussion. So if you go to the next slide. And that it translates to a memorable conversation. If you find yourself practicing with someone and you say these things and ask them to repeat back to you, what did you hear me say? What things did you remember from what I said? If they can't remember anything, that's a problem. But if they remember stuff and it sounds like someone else could have said it instead of you, that's where you know you have room for improvement as well. So, in summary, ACE, appearance, content, evaluation. I hope I gave you some helpful tips for your resume writing going forward. However, I am available, so, and this happens all the time, I'll do these talks, I love to help people fish for themselves, but then I'll still have people who are like, I still need help. If you're interested and want to leave your business card with me, I have room for a couple more clients, and I can take $50 off because I love women in tech this month, so I can give you a certificate to go. And if you're curious in just seeing what it might look like, you can also email me at bernadettejoy@gmail.com to get a quote. And all you have to do is send me your resume and send me an example of a job that you're applying for, and I can tell you, looks good, don't need my help, great, or here's some minor tweaks, or girl, we gotta start over. So if you have any questions, let me know, and I appreciate you taking the time.